And with Disney Plus, we're able to extend this way of storytelling to a new format, creating series that are connected to our theatrical releases, making the MCU more immersive than ever. There's a lot of new content coming from Marvel Studios, so let's get started.
It was always going to be difficult for the MCU Phase Force to follow up on Avengers Endgame and Infinity War, which served as an incredible dramatic conclusion to 10 years of storytelling. The Infinity Saga had a clear, overarching plot and a masterfully planned build-up to the satisfying conclusion. Captain America and Iron Man, who took command of the Avengers and brought the heroes together behind them, are credited with keeping the MCU Phases 1 through 3 together. Their absence from MCU Phase 4 was felt acutely because, despite Phase 4's full schedule of films and TV shows, no clear leaders have emerged in the larger story, leaving the question of who will fill their roles hanging in the balance. To be fair, Phase 4 had the difficult task of essentially restarting the next MCU story that would run throughout the film, along with the Disney Plus series it introduced into the MCU. It needed to create a build-up event to coincide with Avengers Endgame. Following in the footsteps of the second highest grossing film of all time wasn't going to be easy, but MCU Phase 4 ultimately failed to provide moviegoers with any concrete ideas for the MCU's future. In contrast, Phase 4 felt like it was introducing new characters and stories with no real connection to the larger MCU. While Kang, the next major threat, was only briefly seen in Loki Season 1's finale, it could be argued that the cost of binge-watching every new show and film was unnecessary. Unfortunately, Marvel's Phase 4 goals were beyond their capabilities. It's important to remember that only a few years ago, Marvel Studios co-president Luis Exposito explained that the company had stopped making those classic one-shots because it was putting out 4 or 5 films a year and was overstretched. Marvel's Phase 4 expansion includes the same number of movies, as well as a steady stream of Disney Plus TV shows and special presentations. Marvel's business has expanded rapidly, but the results have been noticeably different. The narratives have become more predictable, timeline has become more disorganized, and the visual effects are frequently hurried and incomplete, with writer-director Taika Waititi openly ridiculing his own movie Thor: Love and Thunder. The finale of She-Hulk: Attorney at Law openly mocks this final issue, proving that even Marvel is aware of it. It was only a matter of time before the event-based nature of the films released each year became diluted, especially after Marvel entered the streaming world in Phase 4. The MCU Phase 4 saw an unprecedented influx of content that hardly had time to be consumed, as Disney Plus episodes began to release every other month and the number of movies previously released each year increased from 2 to 3. Viewers may have complained that there was too much of a good thing, but they may have completely lost interest when the good thing became boring, aimless, and devoid of any genuine stakes or drama. Even after Marvel revealed their long-term plans with the MCU Phase 5 slate and hinted that Avengers: The Kang Dynasty and Avengers: Secret Wars were already in production, this only served to highlight how disconnected MCU Phase 4 was from the multiverse saga. Fans had no idea where it was all going, let alone what the true threat was or who would lead the fight against it, until the Kang tease at the end of Loki Season 1 revealed everything. The introduction of the multiverse was intriguing enough, but Phase 4 didn't really advance the plot much beyond bringing back characters from previous MCU films and developing new iterations of the existing one. The MCU Phase 5 trailer and Marvel's upcoming schedule were required for audiences to finally understand the complex plots of Phase 4. Before the MCU had such a plethora of movies and TV shows, many fans would watch all the previous films before watching the most recent release. Given the sheer volume of hours of content produced each year, this is no longer feasible. Even devoted fans can easily overlook minor details that were significant in previous episodes. The average moviegoer now finds it extremely difficult to keep up with the MCU. The series is only available with Disney Plus account, and not everybody wants to spend that much time watching MCU movies. While the MCU has grown to be the most successful film franchise in history, claiming that each of their endeavours has been a success is a fallacy. Many people have criticised, and rightly so, films such as Thor: The Dark World, Iron Man 2, Captain Marvel, and many others. Eternal's poor reviews set a new standard for the fans who were unable to forgive the poor attempt that deviated too far from the Marvel formula. However, this was beneficial in that it allowed people who were generally enthralled with the latest MCU film to examine the franchise more critically and accept the fact that some of it isn't that marvellous. Marvel has been warned to step up their game rather than relying solely on fan loyalty, as follow-up efforts in MCU Phase 4 are graded on a steeper curve than ever before due to this perception from both critics and fans. Ultimately, the lack of character consistency and connection to the main plot of overarching threads seem to be ignored in Phase 4, which are apparent in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. WandaVision has a direct connection to the plot of the film because Wanda Maximoff, who has been researching researching the Darkhold, uses Gargantos to track down America Chavez as a result of her search for her sons across the multiverse. When we begin to connect the dots between WandaVision and Doctor Strange 2, Wanda's development throughout the series is overlooked in order for her to play the villain. After everything WandaVision introduced, the Scarlet Witch's arc cheapens that was good about the show in order to support Doctor Strange's narrative. Her storyline concludes with her sacrifice, which takes her off the pitch. It's also worth noting that Spider-Man No Way Home, in which Strange casts the spell that splits open the multiverse, occurs before the events of Multiverse of Madness. For such a disastrous occurrence, there is little discussion of this interference, and even less is said about its effects. The multiverse is directly impacted in the Loki series after Sylvie kills the Kang variant, disrupting the holy timeline and causing multiversal madness. Yes, that was intentional, and taking the Doctor Strange 2 scenario a step further, shouldn't this have been mentioned in the Multiverse of Madness, given how significant her actions here are in shattering the multiverse? Regardless of the criticism, Miss Marvel and She-Hulk Attorney at Law are two series that actively link to Phase 4 by presenting an Avengers-loving superfan in Miss Marvel's quest to become her own superhero, achieves this balance between her story and her place in the MCU. Agent Clary from No Way Home, for example, searches for the AvengerCon superpowered individual. In the film's closing credits, the Trust the Burrow van from Hawkeye can be seen driving across New Jersey. Not to mention, as a die-hard Avengers fan, she frequently makes inconspicuous references to the MCU and the Avengers. Miss Marvel is the first series to begin to integrate its components with the rest of the MCU, and the series introduces the term mutant.
Like a mutation.
To the MCU hinting at the appearance of the X-Men, the problem was hardly anyone watched this show. Jennifer Walters, aka She-Hulk, and the Superhuman Law Division help the MCU timeline come together and make sense, even if the show doesn't as a whole. She fights for Emil Blonsky's parole after Wong, the Sorcerer Supreme, frees him to join an underground fight club. This is a direct reference to the scene in Shang-Chi and the Legends of the Ten Rings, where Wong fights Abomination. We rarely get a sense of them or when this occurs in the time frame, which has been severely lacking in Phase 4. Phase 4 is similar to a puzzle with the pieces strewn across the table. These parts are still being turned over while a few edge pieces are sorted with minimal joining. Although each story is distinct and deeply personal, the overall plot is so vast that it has yet to reveal its destination. The field has a lot of promise, but the stakes aren't yet high enough. On Earth 616's surface, there is compelling evidence pointing to the Young Avengers, West Coast Avengers, or possibly the Midnight Suns. Instead of working independently in their respective fields, Sharon Carter and Zhang Li should team up to create their own criminal empire. Marvel themselves are allegedly dissatisfied with Phase 4, and they intend to make significant changes to Phase 5 through 6. Marvel Studios is looking to make some changes now that Phase 4 has received mixed reviews, and former Disney CEO Bob Chapek, who was fired. According to the Cosmic Circus, Marvel Studios may undergo significant changes as a result of Bob Iger's appointment as CEO of Disney, and the negative reviews Phase 4 has received from critics and fans. Many believe Marvel's output over the last 2 years have been uneven, and the studio is focusing on quantity rather than quality. Also, according to Cosmic Circus and its sources, Marvel has taken note of those concerns about Phase 4's overall strategy. As a preventative measure to ensure quality control, Marvel and Disney are currently re-evaluating the future releases of Phase 5 and later that are not already in development. They observed that one strategy being considered by Marvel and Disney in order to establish more quality control moving forward is to develop a sort of creative oversight on the MCU's next films. According to the Cosmic Circus, special presentations are becoming more popular behind the scenes as a way to deliver future initiatives. It's important to remember that even with changes, Phase 5 is likely to have roughly the same number of releases as Phase 4, assuming nothing previously announced is completely scrapped. The key point is that viewers should not expect Marvel Studios to produce more work than it already does. Another issue with Phase 4 that was allegedly a huge miss is the claim that it is too woke. While the term has been repurposed by some on the internet, I'm not sure I can agree with the interpretation that Phase 4 is failing due to wokeness. Marvel is said to be pushing an agenda by using diverse characters. While it is certainly a good idea to use more diverse characters such as Shang-Chi, the criticism is that Marvel and Disney are doing so at the expense of other characters. An argument can be made that some characters are pushed to the side to promote others. Consider the show Loki, in which the title character is reduced to a supporting role in favour of Sylvie. There's also calls that Marvel are replacing predominantly white characters with characters of colour, and they are even changing their gender and sexual orientation. The horror.
Oh my God!
Let's be clear, the problem with Phase 4 isn't with the use of diversity or female representation, but people seem to think that Marvel is replacing characters for social justice warrior or political correct reasons. I know I'll lose some people here because I won't jump on the woke bandwagon. However, let's take a step back and see where this orientated from. So let me begin by discussing Captain Marvel. This film has received the most criticism for its support of feminism of any MCU production, but does it actually promote feminism? Carol Danvers is a woman, and women were not permitted to fly in combat during her time in the Air Force, so including that information in her story makes sense and adds a dash of realism. She must be a competent pilot because she was accepted into the Air Force, and not being able to fly would berate her. As a result, she overhears in passing that she isn't good enough because she's a girl. Despite the fact that this is a terrible reality, I see nothing wrong with it. Is this, however, promoting feminism? That is difficult for me to believe. Also, Jude Law and, to a lesser extent, Samuel Jackson can be seen as mentors for her. Both of their personas who recognise her potential and encourage her to be her best. If this was a feminist mouthpiece film, she would undoubtedly be the strongest from the start. Is there an agenda at work? I don't see it. Of course, you can disagree and see it as an agenda. This is all objective. You choose your own path. But let me ask you this. If you think having women fire lasers promotes feminism, how about Iron Man, Captain America and the Hulk? Are those films promoting the military-industrial complex, use of steroids, or are they all subtly teaching us that the only safe form of sex is abstinence? But let's look briefly at the one people hate the most because of their agenda, She-Hulk. You can check out my thoughts on this in my very first video. Apologies for the childburness of the video, but you'll get the point. Anyway, the creators of She-Hulk were very aware of the backlash as they were developing the show, so they addressed the critics before the show even aired. They were basically trolling the trolls. Is this wise and sustainable? Hell no. It's childish and naive to think alienating a huge part of your core fan base would be a great business choice. However, its main flaw was that it did not emphasize the legal aspects of things. People expected a Daredevil-esque show. Perhaps season 2 will make up for it if they ever make it, which appears unlikely. However, the family dynamic is present at its core. Another film worth mentioning is Thor: Love and Thunder, which was, in my opinion, unaffected by the wokeness. It was just a plain disasterpiece. Even though James Foster's Mighty Thor was one of the film's strongest points, the non-stop jokes and inappropriate use of a fantastic antagonist ruined it. And despite the fact that Korg is a rock creature, can rocks be gay? I am aware that there was been concerns about his sexual orientation, but now we're getting into tin hat territory. Anyway, I digress. Thanos required development time. Phase 4 should have spent the time developing Kang the Conqueror. Perhaps he will be able to fill the void Thanos left in our hearts, but it will be a difficult battle given that they squandered an entire phase with little to no character development of Kang. Yes, one could argue that Thanos was only briefly mentioned and appeared in a handful of post-credit scenes, but that was only because the MCU was still figuring out their direction. Kang, on the other hand, should have been a focal point of Phase 4 to provide the audience with a larger, badder and more relatable antagonist. It all feels like a waste of time. Another issue is that many excellent villains were killed off or never returned, but with the multiverse perhaps some familiar faces will reappear. While I do enjoy some of the new characters introduced into Phase 4 such as Hawkeye's Kate Bishop and Moon Knight's Oscar Isaac, regrettably not every character in these stages triumphs. In reality, they frequently go unnoticed, and as I previously stated, despite having his own name in the title, Loki spends the majority of the series without much real urgency, and the show instead gives the reins to Sylvie, a female version of him from an alternate universe. As a result, Loki is pushed to the side in his own show so that Sylvie completes the final climactic action. Similar issues can be found in other entries where the main characters are either crammed in alongside other arcs that are just as prominent, such as in Thor and Love and Thunder, or don't feel like they have much urgency most of the time, such as Doctor Strange in Multiverse of Madness. Furthermore, some of the newcomers aren't as strong as the others. This mostly applies to those introduced in the solo films of other characters. America Chavez remained a powerful MacGuffin until the very end of the Multiverse of Madness, to the point where it wouldn't have made much of a difference to the plot if she had been replaced by a magical relic. In Wakanda Forever, Ironheart had a somewhat more compelling cause for existing, but when it comes to delving into her true personality and motivations, she felt largely underdeveloped. Given that the MCU has previously been successful in introducing new characters in their characters' movies, this is extremely disheartening. A good example is Black Panther in Captain America's Civil War, where the movie was able to seamlessly incorporate his personal development into the main plot. Every time a new character was introduced in previous stages, they were given free rein to shine, which frequently resulted in the villains getting the short end of the stick, feeding the once famous MCU can't build decent villains meme. Nevertheless, Phase 4 frequently demonstrates an unusual unwillingness or inability to fully examine its main characters. When the characters are weaker, it's like eating a Sunday roast with no roast potatoes. What's the point? The MCU started out with a fairly realistic tone. While there were a few stories about a Norse god demolishing a New Mexico town, the vast majority of stories we heard were based on science and technology. After a few films, we began to see crazier things, such as Paul Rudd kicking a massive Thomas the Tank Engine away, or Benedict Cumberbatch yelling at an extraterrestrial intruder. Although these are comic book based films, actual comics can be rather bizarre, so it was a wise decision. But now that we've reached Phase 4, things became increasingly bizarre. That's fine. After the purple space alien, I'd say people are ready to accept more. It's why we got the films like Loki or Thor Love and Thunder, in which we see alternate universes or the eternity, some omnipotent, wish-granting being at the centre of the universe that no one has mentioned before. Even set designs and costumes have become more colourful and faithful to their comic counterparts. Look at Armor's Thor in Love and Thunder. It looks like the designer overdosed on Power Rangers the night before. However, commitment is once again the key to solving the problem. The MCU introduces these concepts, but they are not fully explored. Specifically, the multiverse is not fully explored. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, or to be more precise, Doctor Strange in 3, more like 2.5 universes, must be the most obvious example. In this scenario, we could have seen a lot of the strange parallel universes, but instead we only got a few glimpses and spent the majority of our time in a new universe that is only marginally different. Red light means go. My mind is blown. Also, we don't see any of the new spells that Doctor Strange might conquer. This type of problem can also be found in other entries. Thor Love and Thunder, for example, is set in a city of gods, a gathering place for gods from other civilizations and universes. We even learn about a god of dumplings, which is both stunning and unimaginative, but we only spend a short time in that city, and we never see those gods again. As a result, Phase 4 attempts to incorporate more comic book elements, but fails to fully utilize them, making them appear more like gimmicks than important concepts. Fans of comic books will be disappointed because they won't get to see the wild antics they adore fully realized on screen, while newcomers will feel alienated because such ideas may seem absurd or too large to comprehend. The phase must be either daring enough to fully enter fantastical lands or grounded enough to make those concepts accessible to all. It currently misses an opportunity to kill two birds with one stone. At the end of the day, viewers only need to examine elements like consistency, character, story, and execution to understand why MCU Phase 4 is the weakest phase so far. Phases 1 to 3 of the MCU weren't perfect, but they had a sense of cohesion and progress towards a conclusion as they went, creating an anticipation and whetting fans' appetites for what was to come next. Even the Avengers fought each other in Captain America Civil War for MCU Phase 3. The main antagonist or threat was obvious, as who the Avengers were. The Avengers' lack of leadership in MCU Phase 4 was a problem, though as Phase 5 begins, it is still unclear which characters are Avengers. Kang the Enemy is still grossly underdeveloped, there is no obvious path of action, and there is a ton of inconsistently toned, styled, and thematic stuff. In 2023, the last installment of the Multiverse Saga and Phase 5 of the MCU will be released, revealing to viewers the true direction that Marvel is on. This does not change the fact that most of the MCU Phase 4 seem to be an unrelated side adventure rather than MCU-related people and objects. And what of Kevin Feige in all of this? It's no surprise he's spread too thin. This is the most important factor, and it is related to the previous point about quantity over quality. It was already known that Feige had little influence over Doctor Strange 2, believing that the film's marketing was too spoilery heavy. Despite the fact that Feige has complete creative authority over the series as president of Marvel Studios, there is simply too much for him to handle. In the end, he will simply not have enough time to work and produce a high quality product. This was the case with Mahershala Ali's Blade reboot, which was halted during pre-production in October due to creative differences in Kevin Feige's absence from the project's development. Despite my ramblings, I have not given up on the MCU. I haven't declared the MCU a disasterpiece. I'd prefer not to. I still hope it succeeds because I know what it is capable of. I remember being excited for new installments, new cast members, and new story elements during the Infinity Saga. I also recall debating for far too long the viability of Ant-Man going up Thanos' butt and murdering him. When a brand pulls off an incredible feat like developing a 10-year plot and bringing it to a satisfactory climax, I know the MCU has the potential to achieve more. I really want to feel that way again when I watched Avengers Infinity War, which was released in 2018. I'm hoping that Phase 5 will help viewers re-establish their faith in the MCU's movies and TV shows, and that once it truly begins, the creators will accept feedback, not simply troll them, but I wouldn't be surprised if the worst were to occur. The question now is whether Phase 5 will be sufficient to support the MCU, or whether they will continue to stumble and fall. Such questions are far too difficult to predict at this point in time. Well, that's enough rambling for one day.